It started with a letter, folded in thirds and left without postage on Sarah's kitchen table. The paper was yellowed, crinkled at the edges, as if it had passed through many hands before arriving in her home, and no one claimed to have delivered it and no one admitted knowing anything about it. But it was there, just waiting. One evening when she got home from a long shift at the trauma ward, she lived alone at first. Sarah thought it might be a misplaced medical file or perhaps some absent-minded note she'd scribbled and forgotten about. But the handwriting wasn't hers. Neat cursive inked in dark blue. Every letter pressed with an almost antique formality. Do not ignore the knocking. That was all it said, no name, no context. Just those 5 words. Sarah stared at it for a while. The air in her apartment still and heavy. Outside, the fall evening was already closing in. Sun dipping behind the row of townhomes, windows reflecting the last breath of gold in the sky. She flipped the letter over. Blanked at it unsettled her enough that she brought it with her to the bedroom, placing it on her nightstand like a strange talisman. Something about it was too deliberate to be a prank. But the rational part of her, the ER-trained, blood and bone Sarah, said it was nothing. A mistake. A bored kid. A neighborhood prank. She'd seen worse. Much worse. By the time she showered and changed into pajamas. The whole thing had mostly slipped her mind. She fell asleep quickly. That night, she woke to a sound she couldn't place. Not loud. Not frantic. Just tap, then again, tap, tap. She blinked awake in the dark. Her bedroom curtain shifted slightly in a breeze. But the windows were shut and rained and wind. Tap, tap, tap. She sat up in bed, heart thudding just a little faster now. The sound wasn't coming from the window. It was further inside the apartment. Not quite the front door. Not quite the back kitchen. She stood slowly, body on autopilot. Maybe the faucet was dripping. Maybe it was the pipes. She didn't even grab her phone, just walked toward the kitchen, guided by moonlight and that persistent, rhythmic sound that it stopped the second she stepped over the threshold. The kitchen was dark, but she could make out shapes. Chairs pushed in, dishes in the sink, the old fridge humming in its corner. She flipped the light. Nothing. The window above the sink was closed, curtains drawn. She checked the lock anyway. Secure. She checked the back door. Also locked. Still, the silence now felt somehow too silent. The kind of silence that listens back. She was about to turn and leave when she noticed it. The letter was back. Same fold. Same script. Same spot on the kitchen table. She had left it upstairs. This time, the message had changed. Do not open the door, no matter who knocks. Her stomach dropped. She didn't remember bringing it down. Maybe she sleepwalked? Maybe she forgot. Her mind flipped through possibilities, each one thinner than the last. She grabbed the letter, ran her fingers along the paper's edge. Definitely the same one. She brought it upstairs again, slid it between the pages of a medical journal on her nightstand, and tried to convince herself to sleep by morning. She had rationalized the entire experience as a waking dream, sleep-deprived hallucination. Maybe. She saw it all the time in patients, the brain playing catch-up after prolonged shifts. She laughed it off with a coworker that didn't mention the note. Went about her day. That night, the knocking returned. Only this time it wasn't tapping on glass or distant plumbing echoes. It was at the front door. Knock. 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 A pause. Then louder. Knock. 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 Sarah sat up in bed, pulse thumping against her ribs. It was nearly 3:12 a.m. The apartment was a tomb of stillness again. But the sound of the knocks reverberated through her bones. Knock. 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 She got up, grabbed her phone. No messages. No alerts. No one was supposed to visit. She walked halfway down the stairs before stopping. She could see the front door from there. The porch light was on. No shadow beneath the frame. No shape through the frosted glass. Still. Knock. 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 It was aggressive now. Hungry. She stood frozen on the step, clutching her phone. And then it stopped. She didn't move for what felt like hours. Eventually, when her legs started to ache, she backed away. She slept in the upstairs hallway. The door to her room locked. The letter jammed under the guest room dresser in the morning. There were no footprints on the porch. No letter on the kitchen table. Just silence and sun streaming through her blinds. Days passed. No letters. No knocks. Sarah began to sleep again. She still thought of the letter, Sometimes she even checked the guest room dresser to be sure it was still there. It was still yellowed, still creased, still waiting. She didn't tell anyone. Not yet. She barely believed it herself. Until the neighbor, a man in his 60s, quiet, worked nights, died suddenly, stroke, they said in his kitchen. Found 3 days later. Sarah didn't think anything of it until the man's daughter came to clean out the house. They exchanged polite greetings, talked about weather. Sarah offered help if she needed anything, and that was that. But the next day, she found something in her mailbox. A note, folded in thirds. Do not listen to the voice in the walls. The handwriting was the same. Sarah sat in her car for nearly 20 minutes, staring at the mailbox. Her hands had gone cold on the steering wheel. It was still early, barely 7:00 a.m., and the world looked washed out and blue with morning fog. The letter sat on the passenger seat like a forgotten relic, but she couldn't bring herself to touch it again. Do not listen to the voice in the walls. She'd seen hallucinations before. Heard them, too. Patients in trauma wards, elderly men whispering about things behind the wallpaper, young children screaming about voices only they could hear. It was always the same. Delusions wrapped in neurology, pain bleeding into perception. She could explain those things, but she couldn't explain this. Not when every letter came back in that same exact hand. Not when she'd locked the last one in a room only she had access to. Not when her neighbor, a healthy man jogging every morning, died in his kitchen, and now she was being warned about something. Inside the walls, she finally picked it up again. The paper felt colder than the rest of the air, like it had absorbed a chill from somewhere else. It crinkled slightly in her hand as she brought it inside. This time, she didn't put it on the nightstand, she burned it. She lit a match from a half-empty book in the drawer and dropped the letter into the porcelain sink. The flames curled around the edges with an oily scent, like pine, almost, and turned the paper to ash in less than 30 seconds. But the next morning it was back in the mailbox. Same message, same handwriting, same chill in the paper. That was when she started hearing it. It was subtle at first, just a faint hum in the drywall behind her bathroom mirror. It first. She thought it might be plumbing or maybe the heating coils, but the sound had rhythm. Cadence. It pulsed in time with her heartbeat. She pressed her ear to the tile one night and held her breath. The hum morphed. It was no longer just a tone. It was a whisper. Words formed. Wet, guttural consonants like something being forced through thick water. She couldn't make them out, not clearly, but she recognized the cadence of speech. Someone was talking. She backed out of the bathroom, slept with the light on. For the next week, the house became a stranger to her. Every wall felt like it was hiding something just beneath the surface, like the air between the insulation was breathing. Her radio flickered to static during news broadcasts. Her coffee machine began brewing before she even touched it. Lights clicked off when she entered a room, even with new bulbs, and then came the fourth letter. This time, it wasn't in the mailbox or on the kitchen table. It was pinned to the inside of her bathroom mirror, behind the glass. Not taped or stuck, but sealed. Within the reflective surface, like it had always existed in there, just waiting for her to notice. Do not speak your name out loud after midnight. Her name. That made something snap in her. She made a call. Not to the police, what would she say? But to her old college friend Rachel, now a psychologist. Someone who specialized in grief trauma and post-ICU psychosis. Sarah tried to explain everything over the phone without sounding like a lunatic. There was a pause. Rachel asked if she'd been overworked, if she'd experienced any loss lately. Sarah insisted she hadn't. Then Rachel asked the question Sarah was dreading. Do you think you might be a danger to yourself? That silenced her. Because, if she were honest, she didn't know. She couldn't trust her own senses anymore. Rachel gently offered to come stay with her for a few nights. Said she could drive over after her Friday session ended. Sarah agreed, almost in tears from the relief. She just needed someone else in the house. A second pair of eyes. Proof that this wasn't all a collapse. Friday came. Rachel arrived late, her hair still damp from a shower. Overnight bag slung over one shoulder. They had wine, Sarah avoided the subject. They laughed about college, complained about dating apps, and for a few brief hours, the house felt normal again, until midnight. They were both sitting in the living room, a documentary playing in the background. The time on Sarah's phone ticked over to 12:01. A sound echoed from the kitchen wall. Rachel paused the show. "Did you hear that?" Sarah's blood turned to ice. At it came again. A slow, dragging scrape, like nails being pulled across drywall. Then a whisper so faint it could have been the wind, but Rachel heard it too. "Did someone say your name?" Rachel asked. Sarah nodded, throat tight. They crept toward the kitchen, each step slow and deliberate. The house was dark now, like the lights didn't reach the corners. That Sarah's voice cracked when she whispered, "Don't respond. Whatever happens, don't speak out loud." Rachel looked confused but nodded. They stopped in the kitchen. The whispering had ceased. Silence, thick, pressing, and then knocking from inside the wall. Once, twice. 3 sharp knocks. Rachel's face went pale. Sarah grabbed her arm, turned to flee. But the kitchen light exploded, glass showered down. Rachel screamed. Something moved behind the wall. Something that scraped as it slithered, fast and wet, through the insulation. They barricaded the bedroom, sat in silence. Sarah refused to speak. Rachel tried asking questions, but Sarah only held a finger to her lips and pointed to the clock. It read 12:23. The whispering continued for another hour, always just beneath the threshold of understanding. A language she couldn't place, but one that knew her. Every syllable twisted itself into something familiar, something close, and then, around 2:00 a.m., it stopped. By morning, Rachel was already packing. "I don't know what that was," she said, her voice hollow. "But it wasn't in your head." Sarah nodded. She didn't tell Rachel about the mirror, or the burned letter that came back. She just let her go. Later that evening, Sarah noticed something strange on the mirror again. The note was still there, but this time, the words had changed. "Do not sleep in the house again." She packed a bag and left that night. Sarah rented a motel room 30 miles west of her home, a small roadside place in Ash Creek. It was a single-story building with chipped blue paint, humming vending machines, and a clerk who didn't ask too many questions when she handed over her card with trembling fingers and dark circles under her eyes. Room 8 smelled like cleaning fluid and stale air, but it was quiet. For the first time in weeks, she slept. The next morning, the sun felt real. Again, birds chirped outside. Her coffee didn't make itself. The walls were silent. No letters, no whispers. That first day away from the house passed in a strange daze. She went to a nearby diner, ordered toast and eggs, and stared blankly out the window at the mountains. She didn't go online, didn't check her messages. She just needed time to breathe. The second night was different. She'd fallen asleep early, maybe before 10 p.m., but woke abruptly around 2:13 a.m., heart racing. Not from a dream, just awake. Her skin was clammy. The air in the room had shifted, still, too still. The kind of stillness that suggested something was waiting. Sarah sat up in bed. The motel curtains were drawn tight, but moonlight bled in from the corners, casting long streaks across the ceiling. She listened. No knocking, no whispers, just something else. There was a hum, faint at first, almost beneath hearing. A pressure in her ears, like static trying to resolve itself into something legible. And then she saw it on the desk chair. A piece of paper, folded in thirds. Her heart sank. She hadn't brought any paper with her. Hadn't even opened her duffel since she arrived. She stared at the note for what felt like hours before finally forcing herself to get up. It was the same paper, same blue ink, but this time, the script was tighter, smaller. "Leaving does not help." She dropped it immediately, stumbling back toward the bed. Her legs hit the nightstand and sent the motel phone clattering to the floor. The dial tone buzzed like a scream in her ear. "She no keys, no wallet. Just out the front door in her socks, motel air cold against her skin." The gravel tore at her heels as she sprinted to the front office. The night clerk blinked at her through sleepy eyes. "Everything okay, miss?" She tried to explain. The note, the room, the handwriting. But even as the words poured from her mouth, she realized how insane she sounded. The clerk gave her a polite but wary look, then offered to check the room. Nothing, no note, no paper, no handwriting. He gave her a new key and suggested she get some rest. Maybe stress. Maybe just too much caffeine. Sarah didn't argue. She just sat in the lobby for the rest of the night, under buzzing fluorescence, clutching a cup of water in both hands. The next morning, she called her sister. They weren't close, hadn't been since their mother's funeral, but family was family. Emily answered after 3 rings, her voice groggy and confused. Sarah broke, told her everything. The notes, the whispers, the knocks, the mirror, the walls, the motel. There was silence on the line for a long time. Then Emily said something that chilled her to the core. I got a letter, too. Sarah's breath caught. What did it say? There was rustling on the other end. Then Emily read it aloud. Do not let her speak. Sarah's throat went dry. When did you get it? Yesterday. I thought it was junk. Threw it away. Sarah couldn't form words. Her knees buckled. She sat down on the floor of the motel lobby. You're saying, Emily continued, voice trembling now, that this thing is following you, and now it's, what? Warning me about you? I don't know, Sarah whispered. I don't know what it wants. Emily promised to come get her. 4 hours later, she arrived, white-knuckled and wide-eyed, her little Honda still running in the parking lot. Sarah climbed in without speaking. They drove for 2 hours before either of them said anything. Emily broke the silence. Do you think this is a curse or something? Sarah stared out the window. I don't know. They stayed in a cabin that night. An Airbnb in a wooded area past the state line, isolated. No neighbors, no mirrors. The first night was peaceful. The second was not. It started with the scratching from the walls. But this cabin didn't have adjacent rooms. They were on the top floor. No one on the other side, no plumbing in that wall. Just wood and forest. Then came the voice. Only this time, it knew her name. Sarah? A breath. Like wind. Like something just past the veil of reality. Sarah? Emily heard. It too. They sat on the bed, holding hands like children, flashlights trained on the walls. The voice kept calling, sometimes louder, sometimes faint. It circled the room, drifting from corner to corner. Come back. Then the knock, directly behind Sarah's headboard. She screamed. Emily leapt up. Something crashed to the floor in the living room. Not dropped, but thrown. They fled again. Into the woods, no shoes, no light. They ran until the cabin was a memory. Found shelter with an elderly couple who lived on the outskirts, called the local sheriff. Claimed someone broke in. The cabin was searched, no sign of forced entry, no fingerprints, no signs anyone had been there at all. But the letter was there, left on the pillow, folded in thirds. She belongs to us now. They didn't go back to the cabin. The sheriff offered to let them stay in the station's break room until morning. Neither of them slept. Sarah sat on a folding chair under flickering fluorescence, a paper blanket wrapped around her shoulders, while Emily paced silently, staring at the wall like she was listening for something. In the morning, Emily tried to leave. She didn't say why, just woke Sarah up at dawn, eyes red and glassy, and whispered, I can't be near you anymore. Sarah begged her to wait to talk, but Emily shook her head, got in her car, and drove away without looking back. Her taillights disappeared into fog, swallowed by pine. That was the last time Sarah ever saw her sister. For the next 3 days, Sarah didn't sleep. She tried to go home once. Not to her house, but to a friend's place in the city. But the moment she stepped inside, the pipes began knocking. 1 knock. Then 3. Then 5 in quick succession. Like a code. Then silence. The house began to smell of wet earth. And that night, the friend had a seizure in her sleep. No history. No warning. She was taken to the hospital and Sarah fled once more. She checked into another motel. And another. 1 night only. Never in the same bed twice. But it didn't matter. The letters always found her. They came in glove compartments. Under pillows, on the floor beside vending machines. Folded neatly. Always the same paper. Same ink. The messages were growing more specific. You must return. Let it in. Your name is not your own. At some point, Sarah stopped trying to reason with it. Whatever it was, it knew where she'd go. It knew where she'd end. It knew how to get inside. 1 night, in a rest stop bathroom, she saw her name scrawled on the mirror in condensation, and no one else was there. She wiped it away, turned. The stall door creaked open behind her, and no one was inside. But there was a sound. Not the voice this time. Not the whispers. Something different. A wet, dragging sound. Like something heavy being pulled along tile. She fled. Again. Drove west as far as the tank would take her. She didn't even know where she was when she stopped. Just a stretch of coastal road, cliffs to one side and Black Sea to the other. She left the car and sat on the hood, staring at the horizon. The sun was setting. That's when she heard it. Footsteps on gravel. But when she turned, no one was there. She got off the hood, scanning the tree line. The wind had picked up. It smelled of brine and rot. Then, beside her on the hood, a shadow. Stretched. Long, human-shaped. But cast from no one. And from behind her, a voice, her voice. Sarah, please come home. She turned. Nothing. But a letter now sat on the driver's seat. Folded in thirds, her hands trembled as she opened it. You were never meant to leave. We are already inside you. She drove again. Fast. Reckless. The road blurred around her. Her phone buzzed. Unknown number. She didn't answer. It buzzed again. This time, a text. Emily. Don't speak. Don't move. It hears you. Another buzz. Same number. Emily. Too late. The screen flashed. Glitched. The phone died. She threw it out the window. That night, she found a church. Old. Abandoned, stained glass long broken, pews overturned. But it was shelter. She curled beneath the altar, covered herself in a forgotten robe, and whispered desperate prayers to a God she hadn't spoken to in years. The whispers returned around 2:00 a.m. from beneath the floorboards. They said her name backwards, over and over. Harris, Harris, Harris? She cried until her throat was a W.I in the morning. The sun never came up. Not truly. The light was gray, like a filter had been pulled over the world. Birds didn't sing. The trees didn't move. And on the stone floor beside her, folded perfectly, was a note. You cannot run from what you are. She was changing. She knew it. Not just emotionally. Physically. Mirrors wouldn't hold her reflection anymore. Only a dark silhouette, flickering, like static. Dogs barked at her in the street. Babies screamed. She couldn't remember her birthday. Her medical license had no name printed on it. Her social media accounts had vanished. Every trace of her was fading, and still, the letters came. More urgent, more intimate, written now in first person. I am inside your blood. I see what you see. Let me speak. That night, she did something reckless. She spoke her name aloud after midnight. The world twitched. Every light flickered. Every sound ceased. The stars blinked out like snuffed candles, and from the ceiling of her motel room, something peeled itself down at a shape, tall, wrong. Like the negative space between thoughts, it didn't move. Just stared. Sarah couldn't breathe. She felt her name being torn from her chest. Not her breath. Her name, as though it were an organ, long hidden, and now being dragged from between her ribs by unseen hands. The shape moved closer, and it whispered, not with a mouth, but from every wall. You should never have looked away. Then the lights came back, the world returned, and she was alone, but not empty. She could feel it inside her now, whispers behind her thoughts, shadows behind her eyes. She collapsed. When she woke, another letter was tucked in her fist, folded in thirds, no ink, just blood. Sarah didn't know how long she lay there. The blood-soaked letter crinkled in her hand, still warm. She tried to open it, but the paper tore, delicate as skin. The words weren't written in ink. They were carved, deep, jagged letters that pulsed faintly like veins under flesh. We are here. Her vision blurred. The room pulsed. It wasn't pain she felt. It was pressure. Something inside her was growing. Not like a tumor. Not like a sickness. More like a presence, a root system expanding beneath the surface of her awareness. She could hear it now even when there was silence, a soft chorus of voices, indistinguishable and overlapping, a crowd murmuring behind her thoughts. Sometimes they were frantic. Sometimes they wept. Sometimes they laughed. But always, they called her name. And worse, sometimes she caught herself answering to a first. It was unconscious, a nod to an invisible question, a murmur in a mirror. Then full conversations and dreams she didn't remember. The worst part. She no longer recognized the voice that answered point one night. As she walked the shoulder of an empty interstate, headlights flared behind her. She turned instinctively. It was an old pickup truck. The man inside was heavy-set, mid-50s, farmer's tan, trucker cap. He pulled over, rolled down the window. "You okay, ma'am? You look, lost." Sarah opened her mouth to respond, but no sound came. The man frowned. "You all right?" She tried again. Her lips moved, but the sound that came out was not her voice. It was low, wet, like something speaking through oil. The man recoiled. "What did you say?" Sarah couldn't answer. He sped off, dust clouding the dark highway. His brake lights blinked wildly, like he couldn't hit the gas fast enough. Sarah stood there a long time, staring at her hands. They were changing. The veins were darker, tracing unfamiliar patterns. Her fingertips tingled constantly, like they were touching something that wasn't there. Mirrors no longer reflected her face, only a silhouette with eyes like holes torn in the world. She remembered what Rachel had said the night she stayed over. I don't know what that was, but it wasn't in your head. She wondered what had happened to Rachel since, what she'd seen, what she remembered. The next letter answered that question. It was pinned to the door of a boarded-up gas station she passed the next morning, folded in thirds. Rachel saw too much. The message was burned into the paper. She checked her phone. Finally charged after plugging it in at a diner restroom the night before. One new voicemail. It was Emily. Her voice was fragmented, static-laced. "If you hear this, don't, not safe, letters are." Then a sound like screaming metal, and something whispered over the line. "We are almost done with her." The call cut out. Sarah threw the phone into the ocean. She found a library 2 days later. Old, dusty, barely functioning. But the computer lab worked. She sat down at one of the terminals and searched her name. Nothing. NO records, NO birth certificate, NO school photos, NO licenses, NO hospital records. Even her ER staff profile gone. She tried her sister's name, her friend's. Rachel's. Also gone. Even Google returned blank pages. As if the names had been censored from reality. One entry remained. A forum. Post. 10 years old. Archived. Broken link. The title read, "Do not answer the knocks. They want your name." The author's name? Redacted. She printed it out anyway. Tried to look for a clue in the cached version. The page was corrupted, text glitching into gibberish symbols. But 2 words were legible near the top. Third knock, invitation. That night, the letters stopped. For a day. Then came one final one. It wasn't folded. It was etched into a motel wall in scratches so deep they split the plaster. "It is time, come home." And beneath it, her full name. Sarah Madeline Crow. A name she hadn't heard in weeks. She hadn't said it aloud in nearly a month. She said it then. Once. Clearly. Sarah Madeline Crow. The lights died. Every bulb in the building exploded. Doors slammed open. People screamed. And in the chaos, they came. Not from outside. Not from under beds or inside closets. But from inside her. One by one, the shadows spilled out. Tall and silent, eyeless and smooth, like they'd been shaped by forgetting. They surrounded her in perfect stillness, and the walls whispered, "You were the doorway." Then everything changed. Sarah didn't disappear. She still walks among us. You might pass her on a bus, see her face in a crowd, speak with her at a clinic. But she's not Sarah anymore. She's a house of voices. A moving letter. A reflection that forgot which side of the glass it was on. And sometimes, if you stay up too late and listen too long to the walls of your home, you might hear her, not knocking, but whispering, asking, very softly, "May I come in?" If you answer, a letter will find you, folded in thirds, with just 5 words. Do not ignore the knocking. Trevor Langford didn't believe in ghosts. Not when he was a kid, not as an adult, and especially not when he bought the cabin in northern Maine. The idea of a haunted house or cursed land or vengeful spirit, none of that fazed him. He was a software engineer, 38 years old, practical to a fault and freshly divorced. The cabin was supposed to be a reset. He'd found it on a local classified site, the listing almost too good to be true. A lakefront property for a fraction of market. Price point: 3 bedrooms, fireplace, private dock, and 20 miles from the nearest town. It had been unoccupied for over a decade, but structurally sound. The pictures showed hand-carved railings, a wide front porch, and views that would make a screensaver jealous. He didn't ask why it was so cheap. He just needed somewhere quiet, a place to think, to forget. The key was left for him under a moss-covered rock near the back door. There was no real estate agent, no closing papers. A handshake agreement with a grizzled man named Weller who wore 2 flannel shirts at once and refused to step onto the property line. When Trevor offered to drive him up to the house, Weller had just shaken his head and said, "Ain't no one should sleep in that place more than once." Trevor had chuckled. "Why's that?" Weller looked past him, toward the woods. "Because it remembers." Trevor didn't press further. He assumed Weller was half drunk or trying to be ominous. Rural folklore. Probably. Every town had stories. But now, standing in the doorway of the cabin with the key in his hand and the wind moving through the trees like breath, he wasn't so sure. The house felt empty. Not dusty, not decrepit, just like it had been waiting. The wood floors groaned when he stepped inside, and the air was thick with the smell of cedar and old rain. Everything was exactly as it had looked in. The photos, the kitchen with its hanging pots, the fireplace with a rusted poker, the old couch with faded cushions, even the painting above the mantel. A forest scene, done in oil strangely vivid, was still there. The first night passed uneventfully. He unpacked, ate chili, lit a fire, and read a paperback thriller until sleep pulled him under. He didn't dream. The second night, the knocking started, not on the door. Inside the walls. It was faint at first, like branches against the siding. Trevor assumed it was wind. The weather had turned, and a cold snap had rolled in around 3:00 a.m. He woke to the sound of the kitchen chair scraping against tile. He walked downstairs, heart drumming louder than footsteps. The room was empty. The chair was slightly out from the table. Nothing else seemed touched. He pushed it back and returned to bed. He told himself it had probably shifted from uneven floorboards. Maybe he hadn't noticed it earlier. But the next morning, when he opened the pantry, a note fluttered to the floor. It wasn't there the day before. Written on yellowing paper, in tight handwriting, "It comes when the fire dies." Trevor stared at it for a long time. He thought about Weller's face, the way the man wouldn't cross the property line. Then he folded the note and tossed it into the fireplace. It caught quickly, curling into ash. He kept the fire burning that night. Slept on the couch. The wind picked up after midnight. He swore he heard footsteps on the porch. Slow, deliberate steps. But when he checked, no one was there. Just pine needles and frost. He left the fire roaring. Added 2 more logs. Then turned in. The next morning, the fire was cold. Logs untouched. Unburned. And on the mantel, where his book had been, sat a second note. "It waits behind the walls." Trevor tried to laugh it off. A prank. Maybe. Left by the last owner. Some elaborate joke. But he couldn't find the book anywhere. Not under the couch. Not behind the cushions. Not in the fireplace. It was gone. And that night, he dreamed he was walking through the woods, barefoot, the earth cold and damp beneath him. The trees whispered his name. The sky was gone. Just a sheet of endless gray above the branches. Then, ahead, he saw the cabin. It looked wrong. The angles too sharp. The roof too high. The windows too dark. But he stepped inside anyway. The floor pulsed underfoot. The fireplace was burning. But the flames moved in reverse, rising downward into the logs, and in the far corner of the room, something stood tall, faceless, wrapped in what looked like burlap soaked in pitch. It raised one arm, impossibly long, and pointed to the wall. Then Trevor woke up. He was standing in front of the wall, hand outstretched, palm pressed to the wood. The fire had gone out. And on the floor beside his foot, a third note. "Don't listen to it lies." The next day, Trevor drove into town. He needed to speak to someone. Anyone. But the town felt hollowed out. People watched him from behind curtains. The waitress at the diner dropped her pen when he asked about the cabin. The man at the gas station gave him change with shaking hands. Only one person spoke to him willingly. A librarian named Elsie, who looked about 70 and had eyes like cold water. "You're staying there?" Trevor nodded. Elsie pursed her lips. The Langley place. That cabin's older than this town. Older than the map. The first records are from 1873. The family vanished. All 6 of them. Left dinner on the table. Lights still burning. Trevor asked what happened. She didn't answer directly. Just said, it never wanted people, it wanted to be one. That night, he returned to the cabin and found the 4th note nailed to the inside of the door. It remembers your voice. He tore the note off the door and crumpled it in his fist. His knuckles were pale, jaw tight, heart thudding like a fist against glass. This was no prank. Not some leftover joke from a bored teenager. Someone or something was leaving him messages, and they were getting closer. He didn't sleep that night. He kept every light on. Chopped firewood until his arms ached and fed the fire until the hearth glowed like molten stone. But something was wrong with the flames. They didn't crackle. They whispered. Not aloud. Not in sound. But in meaning. Like the flames were murmuring just below comprehension. Pulling thoughts from his head and feeding them back twisted, he sat before the fireplace. Hypnotized, hours passed. The logs turned to charcoal and still, no warmth. His skin felt chilled even with the glow washing over him. Then, around 3:47 a.m., he heard the voice that it didn't come from the fire, that it came from the wall behind the couch, that a woman's voice, soft, like it was underwater. Trevor? He froze. Trevor, I'm so cold. He turned slowly. The wall pulsed faintly, that a hairline crack ran down the middle. One he hadn't noticed before as he stared. It widened, barely an inch, then 2 through it. He saw a wide gray. Unblinking, that he stumbled back, tripping over the rug. By the time he reached the kitchen and spun around, the crack was gone, wall smooth. Seamless. He didn't sleep again that night. In the morning. The fire had gone out. A 5th note was waiting on the counter. Written in darker ink, or perhaps something not ink at all. You spoke to her. Now she knows your name. He ran outside and vomited into the dirt. The woods stared back silently. He thought about leaving. Really leaving. Packing up. Abandoning the cabin. Driving to the nearest airport and getting on a plane to anywhere. But he didn't. Something held him. Not obligation. Not pride. A presence. Like the house had wrapped invisible tendrils around his spine and whispered, stay. So he stayed. The next day passed quietly. No notes, no voices, no strange dreams. That he dared to hope it was over. Until that night, when the fireplace lit itself, he watched it happen. He'd laid no logs that hadn't struck a match. But the hearth ignited, all at once. In a slow, vertical flame that it danced against nothing, twisting higher than the mantle, and inside it, he saw faces, flickering, screaming faces. As if pressed against burning glass. They mouthed words he couldn't hear. That he dropped the whiskey glass in his hand and stumbled backward. The flames grew brighter, white hot, then blinked out. Silence, darkness, smoke, and a note, lying in the ashes. You remember them, don't you? Trevor backed into the kitchen and locked the door, as if it mattered. As if any of the locks ever worked against whatever this was. He curled up on the floor, arms around his knees, and counted backwards from 100. The fire didn't come back. The next morning, he noticed something in the bathroom mirror. A message, fogged onto the glass even though the room was cold. She is in the floorboards. That night, he pulled the rug back in the living room. The planks were old, dusty. A few creaked louder than the rest. He tapped them, one by one, then one shifted. Just slightly. He pried it up. The cavity beneath was small. No more than 2 feet deep, but inside sat a box. Wooden, stained black at the edges, and locked. He pulled it out. His hands were shaking. Inside were photographs. Dozens of them, old, yellowing, taken with flashbulb cameras. They all showed the cabin. Same view. Different people. Different eras. 1940s, 1960s, 1980s. Always 3 or 4 individuals, couples, families, friends, and always in front of the fireplace. But each photo shared something else in common. In the background, barely visible, a shape. Near the window. Or just inside the hallway. Sometimes outside the glass. A tall figure. Blurred. Watching, Trevor flipped faster now. 1 photo, from 1979, had writing on the back. The 4th night was the worst. That's when she crawls out. He counted. It was his fourth night. A gust of wind slammed the shutters. Trevor dropped the box. The photos scattered across the room, and then he heard it. A dragging sound across the floorboards from beneath. He stepped back. His breath caught. The board he'd lifted was moving again. Rising from below, he ran out the door, into the woods, barefoot and blind in the moonlight. He didn't stop until his lungs burned. The trees stood around him, tall and unmoved. And then, a knock. From the tree behind him. Once, twice, 3 times. He spun. Nothing there, but at his feet. Another note, folded clean, crisp. You can run, but she's inside you now. Trevor couldn't breathe. He stared at the note on the forest floor, willing it to disappear. His hands trembled as he bent down and picked it up. The words pulsed in his mind, over and over. She's inside you now. The woods were deathly silent, no birds, no insects. Even the wind had stopped, as if the forest itself was holding its breath. The air felt thick, like walking through a dream made of syrup. He backed away from the tree, trying to retrace his steps. But the path looked different. Trees that hadn't been there before. A rock that seemed too perfectly round. His footprints gone. He wasn't just lost in the woods. He was not supposed to leave them. And the whispers knew. They didn't speak in words now. They pulsed at a low-frequency hum in his skull, like radio static tuned just beyond meaning. But the feelings they carried were clear. Guilt, hunger, ownership, as if a million thoughts were pushing through him at once. None of them his. He ran. Branches scraped his arms. Brambles caught his legs. The forest closed around him like a tightening throat. He saw the cabin again just before sunrise. It rose over the trees like a wound in the world, unnatural in its stillness. There was something wrong with the geometry of it now. Corners that didn't align, shadows that stretched the wrong way. But it was the only place he knew. He stepped inside. The air was colder than outside. The fireplace was already burning. He hadn't lit it. A figure stood before it. Tall, still, facing the flames. It looked like him. Same posture. Same hair. Trevor didn't move. The figure didn't either. Then it turned. The face was almost his, but the eyes were wrong, too dark, too hollow. They sucked in light, and the mouth was stretched into a smile that didn't match any human emotion. Trevor stepped back. The other Trevor tilted its head, mimicking him. Then it spoke. You let her in. Its voice was exactly his own. She was waiting. Trevor backed toward the door. But the air behind him grew solid. He turned and saw the wall had closed in. The hallway was gone. The thing took a step closer. She likes your voice. It sounds like home. Trevor reached for anything. A poker, a lamp, anything to defend himself. But his limbs felt distant. His arms were no longer responding the way they should. As if his body was second-guessing his commands. The doppelganger smiled wider. She's teaching you. Do you feel her moving behind your eyes? And then, suddenly, it cracked. Literally. The face split. Not in blood. In light. Like porcelain dropped on marble, thin fissures racing across the skin. The eyes vanished, replaced by a swirling darkness that pulled at him. He screamed. The thing shattered. No explosion, no sound. Just gone, and Trevor collapsed. When he woke, it was dusk. He was on the couch. The fire had burned out, and on his chest lay a note folded so neat, so quiet. You are almost ready. Trevor dropped it like it burned. He looked at his hands. They didn't feel like his hands. The fingertips were darker, fingernails grayer. His knuckles pulsed, just faintly, like something beneath the skin was breathing. He sprinted to the bathroom and flipped the light. His reflection stared back at him. But it was wrong. His eyes didn't blink. The mirror showed him smiling, even though his mouth was tight with panic. When he raised his hand, the reflection lagged, as if caught in slow motion, and behind him, in the mirror, stood a woman. He turned. Nothing. The mirror was empty now. Just him. Just panic. He grabbed a chair and smashed the glass. Shards scattered across the floor. He stared at his fractured face in pieces. Each shard showed a different expression. One laughed, one wept, one mouthed, "Help me." That night, he sealed the fireplace. Nailed planks across it, poured water inside, sprinkled salt in a circle around the living room. Then he sat in the center of the room and waited. No sleep, no dreams, just breathing. His The house's, hers. Around 2:45 a.m., the knocking started again. But this time, it was inside his chest at a heartbeat that didn't belong to him. That it skipped. Then again, then doubled. Trevor clutched his ribs. He could hear it now. Whispers from his own blood. "You are the door. You are the door. You are the door." He screamed until his throat tore, punched the wall, slammed his fists into the ground. Anything to silence the voices. Then, mercifully, blackness. He awoke the next morning in the forest, barefoot, and no memory of leaving. That a circle of ashes surrounded him. Burnt into the ground and in his hand. Another note. This one not folded, just a single word. Soon. He went to town. Found Elsie at the library again. Told her everything. Her face turned pale. She didn't interrupt, didn't dismiss him. When he finished, she reached into her desk and handed him an old, cloth-bound book, thin, titled in faded ink, The Hollowing. "It's not just the cabin," she said. "It's what the cabin was built on. The Langley family didn't go missing. They were consumed." Trevor asked what it wanted. Elsie looked at him, tears in her eyes. "To be human. And it needs a shape, a name. A voice." He asked what to do. She didn't answer. She just handed him one last page, torn from the back of the book. A ritual. Or a warning. He didn't read it yet. He didn't want to know what it cost. But that night, back at the cabin, the fire was burning again. Even though the hearth was still sealed, and from within the flames, a voice spoke. In his own voice. "Let me in." Trevor didn't move. He stood at the edge of the living room, eyes locked on the hearth he had sealed just 2 nights before. The planks nailed across the fireplace were still there, warped, blackened now by heat. But the fire blazed through them anyway, as if the wood were invisible to it. The flames made no sound, and no crackling, and no snapping, only that whispering heat, like breath beneath the skin of the world. His own voice echoed from within. "Let me in." Trevor backed away. The house watched. Every shadow in the room leaned toward him, even though the flames should have cast them in the other direction. The clock above the mantel ticked erratically, fast and slow, then backwards, then stopped. Somewhere in the ceiling, something crawled, and then, on the coffee table, a note appeared. He hadn't seen it before. Hadn't blinked. But there it was. No longer folded, just laying flat. "You've already said yes." He tore it to pieces and fled into the kitchen. The window was warped, bent inward, as if the house itself was curving toward him. He thought of the hollowing, the faded book Elsie gave him. The phrase ran through his mind like a prayer. It wants shape. It wants name. It wants voice. He pulled the torn ritual page from his coat pocket. The ink had moved. Where once it had detailed a protective rite, salt circle, incantation, symbols drawn with blood. Now the letters had rearranged into something else. A sentence. "The door is you." His breath hitched. The salt ring he'd made was broken now. A trail of it pulled outward, like something had crawled through it, and worse. Something inside him had changed. His mouth felt wrong. Like the shape of his tongue wasn't entirely under his control. His voice, when he spoke aloud, came out half an octave too deep. He picked up a butcher knife from the counter. His hands didn't shake. He didn't know what he intended to do with it. Cut something? Himself? The floor? Maybe carve open the wall, where he saw the eye that first night. But his body was acting on instinct now. Compulsion. A rhythm not his own. Then he heard the singing. A child's voice, from upstairs, soft, wordless. Like a lullaby without language. He gripped the railing of the staircase with white knuckles. The knife forgotten at his side. He hadn't opened the second floor since arriving. The doors up there remained shut. The air too still, too cold. But now one door was open, just slightly, and behind it, that haunting hum. He stepped toward it. Each stair groaned, not with weight, but recognition. At the top. The hallway was darker than it should have been. The light bulb flickered once, then blew. He approached the open door. Inside, the room was lit only by the full moon pouring through the window. There was a crib. He stopped. He hadn't seen that before. The crib rocked gently, creaking. The lullaby continued. He reached the crib, looked in empty, except a note cradled in the center. "We took her voice, you gave us yours." Trevor turned, ran, back down the stairs, but the house had changed. The stairs didn't descend correctly. He turned one corner and found himself facing the hallway again. He spun back. Another hallway, endless, curling into itself, doors that opened onto the same hallway again and again. The cabin was folding. Trevor screamed, not in fear. Enraged, he grabbed a lamp, hurled it against the wall. The plaster rippled, absorbing the impact like skinned and shattered and crash. Just a dull thud. The voice returned. His voice. You know what we are now. He fell to his knees, clutched his skull, memories surged. Not his own. A woman standing at the edge of a lake, weeping blood from her ears. A man hammering nails into his own eyes to unsee what he glimpsed in the fireplace. A child speaking backwards to her reflection, smiling as it mimicked her. So many voices, so many names, and all of them ended in silence. He staggered into the kitchen. The window now showed the fireplace, as if space had warped, turned in on itself, and the fire was burning. Blue. Inside it, a silhouette, not moving, not threatening, just waiting. It lifted a hand, palm out, like a greeting, like an invitation. Trevor screamed, ran into the pantry, slid the old shelf aside. He remembered the photo box, the floorboard. He needed proof. Anything to show that this was real, that he wasn't just unraveling alone, but the box was gone. The floorboard gone, and seams, just smooth, perfect wood. But on the shelf now sat a single, neatly folded note. He opened it with numb hands. You were always hollow. We only made you aware of it. The room spun. He stumbled back out, nearly slipped on the salt trail. His vision darkened at the edges. Like ink bleeding across his eyes. He crawled to the couch, curled into the fetal position, waited for dawn. But the sun never came. When he opened his eyes again, the clock read 3:0 a.m. Still at it had been 3:0 a.m. for hours. The fire burned behind nailed wood. The walls breathed, and on his chest, warm as breath, lay another note. Not ink, carved into his skin. The pain didn't hit right away. Trevor opened his eyes and saw the blood first, a slow trickle, soaking through his shirt where the words had been carved. He pulled up the fabric with shaking fingers. The letters were deep, raw, jagged. I am the door. Not you. As if the thing, whatever lived inside the cabin, inside him, was now speaking through him, using his body like parchment, using his nerves like ink. The fire crackled again. Real this time, sound and heat and motion, but Trevor knew he hadn't lit it. The planks he'd nailed across the hearth were gone, and no ash, no broken wood, just absence, like they'd never been there at all. He dragged himself to the bathroom, washed the blood away. But the words wouldn't stop bleeding. He looked up into the mirror and saw her again. The woman, the presence. Now clear. She was behind his reflection, standing exactly where he would be if she were real, dressed in black, skin pale and cracked like old porcelain. Her lips moved, but he couldn't hear her. Not aloud. He heard her in his bones. You let me out. He turned, ready to strike. Anything, anyone, even the air, but no one stood behind him still. Her shape was burned into the glass. He punched the mirror. It didn't break. Instead, it shuddered, like gelatin, like something fluid. His reflection stared back at him, flickering. Now her, now him, now something in between. A third face, long hollow, with no mouth. He backed away, fell to the tile floor, eyes wide with terror. And then, the cabin spoke, all at once. Every surface groaned. The ceiling moaned, the walls pulsed, the floor buckled slightly beneath him. The cabin didn't contain the thing. The cabin was the thing, built not on haunted land, but as a vessel. A skin, and it had finally digested enough voice, enough memory, enough self to become whole. A heartbeat echoed through the structure. Not his, not human. He crawled outside. The porch was warped, boards rising like ribs under flesh. The trees were wrong again, tilting in ways that defied gravity. The lake was black, not from night, from absence and no moon and no stars. Just that reflectionless surface. He made it to the dock, fell to his knees, breathed, breathed. Then he heard it again, his name. Trevor. Not a whisper. A chorus. Thousands of voices speaking at once. Some sobbing, some laughing, some praying. And all of them coming from beneath the lake. He looked down, saw the water roil. Then it parted. Not splashed. Not churned parted, like hands pulling open a curtain. And beneath it, faces, hundreds, thousands, all floating just under the surface, staring up with blank eyes and open mouths. Some he recognized. His own. Twice he staggered back. The doc breathed. He heard something climb onto the boards behind him, wet, tall. Not walking. Gliding. He turned. Too late. She was there. Not in the reflection. Not in the fire. I in the world. The woman from the mirror. Her eyes were empty sockets. Her fingers too long. She opened her mouth, but it wasn't a mouth. It was a doorway. Behind her teeth. The cabin lived. He screamed. Tried to jump. But the dock was gone. Only floorboards, fireplace, walls. Ceiling. He was inside again. Had never left. The lake, the dock, the trees, illusions. Bait. He stood in the center of the living room, naked, and no blood, and no clothing, and no self. Around him, the photos spun. Floating in the air. All of them. Had changed. Now they showed him in each. Different poses, different eras, but always him, and in every photo. The woman beside him. Smiling. In some. She wore his face. In others. He wore hers, and still the fire burned. Not red. Not blue. But black. A flame that devoured light. He stepped toward it. Not by will. By compulsion. The same way a door swings when pushed. He was no longer a man. He was the final hinge. The fire whispered, "Speak your name." He opened his mouth. Felt her push against the edges of his skull. He tried to resist. Clenched his jaw. Tears burned his eyes. Trey. His voice cracked. Trey V. The walls pulsed. Say it. Give us form. He screamed. And in that scream, something broke. Not in him. In the house. The fire exploded outward. Not with heat, but with silence. A wave of stillness slammed into him, tore the breath from his lungs, and then he woke. In the hospital. 2 weeks later. They found him wandering a dirt road in Maine, naked, dehydrated, covered in carvings. He didn't speak for days, didn't sleep. When he finally opened his mouth again, his voice was strange, just a little too smooth, just a little too flat. And when the nurse asked his name, he smiled and said, "Trevor Langford." But she swore the voice wasn't his, and that night, in her apartment, the nurse found a letter on her kitchen table. Folded in thirds, and no return address. It read, "Do not speak to him after dark." Maya Farrell didn't believe the video at first. She worked overnight security at the West Hill Industrial Complex, a collection of old shipping warehouses and corporate offices in upstate New York that had once hummed with life. Back in the 90s. Now, the entire place was a shadow of itself. Half the buildings leased out to startups or off-grid research labs, the rest sitting in permanent limbo. Too expensive to tear down. Too unstable to sell. Maya's job was simple. Patrol buildings B through F, watch the monitors, file a report every 4 hours, and, above all, never enter building H. That last part wasn't in the job description. It came from her predecessor, a guy named Darren who quit without notice 2 months before she started on his last day. He left his keycard and a crumpled sticky note on her desk. "If building H lights up, just look away. Don't go in. Not even for a second." Maya laughed it off. Assumed he was being dramatic, maybe trying to spook the newbie. The building in question sat on the far east end of the property. A gray concrete box, sealed with rusted steel doors and a keypad that never beeped as far as she knew. It wasn't even powered. The other guards joked about it too. "Probably haunted," one said. "Or full of asbestos," said another. But something about the way Darren's note was written, the shaky pen, the urgency of "just look away," stayed with her. Especially the night the lights came on. It was just after 2:11 a.m. a Tuesday. She was sipping lukewarm coffee, watching a raccoon crawl through the parking lot on camera 6, when camera 13, building H's feed, flickered to life. It had been black since she started the job. But now, lights on. Interior hallway visible. A figure standing at the far end. Too far to make out clearly, but tall, thin, facing the wall. Not moving. Maya leaned in, confused. She reached for the walkie. "Dispatch, this is West Hill North. Building H just lit up. Are we expecting maintenance?" Silence. Then static. Then, Negative that no authorized activity there. Repeat, no staff should be present. She stared back at the screen. The figure was still there, same position. She rewound the feed, but the recording started only seconds before the lights came on. Nothing before that. Like the building had simply booted up. She switched to the thermal camera NO heat signature. She zoomed in. The figure's shadow didn't match the light direction. Her spine prickled. She sat back, suddenly aware of how cold the room felt. She reached for her coat, and that's when the monitor flickered again. The figure had turned, now facing the camera. Still too far to make out details. Still too still. Maya stared for several seconds. Then, slowly, the hallway lights began shutting off point one by one. Closer. She fumbled with the keyboard, switched views, checked all the other cameras. Nothing unusual. The raccoon was gone. The wind picked up slightly. She returned to camera 13. Black screen. But the word active pulsed in the corner. The feed was still live. Just no light. She tried to turn on the hallway sensors. They didn't respond. Then came the knock. Three sharp taps against the security room door. She froze. No one else should be in the building. Not at that hour. Not without a call ahead. Dispatch, she whispered into the walkie. I've got someone at the door. Please advise. Static, more knocking, faster now, more urgent. She stood quietly and crept to the small viewing slot built into the door. No one there. But the hallway lights outside were off, even though they had just been on. She turned on the hallway monitor. The feed showed her hallway empty, except a shadow moved across the far wall. But there was no source. She backed away, locked the door. The knocking stopped. Then came a whisper, not through the door. Through the walkie. Just one word. Open. She dropped the walkie. IT landed with a crack. The screen turned to static, and on the monitor, the camera in Building H showed a new scene. A room. Empty except for a table. And on that table, a single object. Her keycard. She checked her belt. IT was gone. And in the corner of the screen, a new line of text had appeared. Entry granted. Maya staggered back from the monitors, heart thudding hard enough to rattle her ribs. She looked down again at her waist. The keycard was still gone. She hadn't moved. She hadn't left the chair. How had it ended up in there? The security feed for Building H remained lit. The camera angle had changed. A new feed now showed a downward view, as if from the ceiling. The card still resting on the metal table, but now there were two chairs pulled out. One on either side. One was empty. The other was occupied. She leaned in closer at a figure. Same height as her, wearing what looked like her uniformed cap jacket. Even the reflective shoulder patches. Its head was down, hands flat on the table. IT wasn't moving. Maya's mouth went dry. She fumbled for the backup walkie. A beat-up, analog model locked in the drawer with a passcode. She keyed in the override and brought it up to her lips. This is Maya Farrell. North Security. I have unauthorized activity in Building H. Possible break in .my keycard is inside. I didn't authorize entry. Request immediate backup. Silence. Then, finally, dispatch. Static choked. Distant. Maya, we don't see. Camera shows no. What are you talking about? She blinked. What? Building H is dark, the voice replied. Feed's been off since 8. Nothing there. No, I'm looking at it, she snapped. It's active. Room 301.2 chairs. .1 occupant. Table MY keycard. Negative, said dispatch. Camera 13 hasn't worked in 16 years. The line went dead. She stared back at the monitor. The occupant in the chair now had their head lifted, just slightly. Enough for her to see its eyes. Her eyes, same shape. Same scar above the brow. The little one she'd gotten climbing a fence at age 12. It was her. But, off, too pale, too stiff. The doppelganger turned its head to face the camera. Her. Its lips didn't move, but the monitor emitted a low-frequency buzz that quickly rose to something like speech. Digital. Broken. Welcome, /MAYA/ Farrell / host sequence initialized. The lights in the security room flickered, then surged. All monitors shut off. The emergency generator clicked on. Red lights washed the room in warning tones. An alarm started. Faint, Not from the building systems, from the walls. She stepped back, stumbling over her chair. The smell of copper and ozone filled the room. The monitors blinked back on, but now showed nothing but her face. In real time, from every angle, impossible angles. A top-down shot. A side view. A feed that showed her from behind, even though no camera was there. The door buzzed. A new voice crackled through the walkie. Her own, but layered. Like 5 voices in unison, slightly out of sync. Why did you look, Maya? She couldn't breathe. She grabbed the emergency override panel, the one meant to lock down every building on the property. Slammed the lever. Nothing happened. Instead, the screen blinked. Override denied. You are already inside. She turned. The door to the hallway was now open. Only blackness beyond, but not stillness. Breathing wet, slow, collective breathing. She backed away, slowly, deliberately. Then her cell phone buzzed. She nearly cried with relief. Caller ID. Maya Farrell. Her own number. She answered at a whisper. Not hers, but from her. I'm waiting in the room. Click. She dropped the phone. He hit the ground. Screen first on the glass was a static image. A paused feed. Room 301. The chair was now empty. No card, no doppelganger, no table. Just a shadow cast against the wall, her shadow. But it wasn't moving. It was waving. She screamed. Ran from the security booth. Out the door. Down the hallway. Only, she wasn't in the admin building anymore. The halls had changed. The walls were concrete. The same as building H. Light panels hummed overhead, flickering in pulses like a heartbeat. She stopped, turned around. The security booth was gone. Behind her, just more hallway. No doors, no windows. Just hallway. She pressed herself against the wall, breathing hard. It was cold, too cold. Then she noticed it. The concrete surface beneath her hands was warmed. No, not warm, pulsing. She stepped back. The wall pulsed again, in perfect time with her heartbeat. And then, it changed. Words bubbled to the surface, carved from inside. You walked in when you looked. Suddenly, alarms sounded in the far distance. A klaxon, a warning. Then a voice. Containment breach. Sector H. Host integrity compromised. Maya backed away from the wall. A door appeared. Literally. Appeared. It wasn't there a moment before. Red metal and no handle. Then a note slid out from under it. Her name printed on the outside. Inside, a single sentence. Sit at the table. Or keep running. She looked back down the hall. Then at the door. Her heart was thudding now, out of sync with the flickering lights. One more message blinked on the wall beside her. Room 301 ready for occupancy. She didn't remember touching the door, but it was open now. A hiss of pressure escaped as if the room behind it had been sealed for years, and something warm and wet clung to the air as she stepped through. Not humidity. It was thicker than that, almost like stepping into someone's breath. Room 301. The air didn't smell like dust or mold or chemicals. It smelled like memory. Like scorched hair and shampoo. Like old blankets and antiseptic. A smell that tugged at something ancient in her. Not from childhood, not even from this lifetime, something older. The room was circular, impossible. The exterior of Building H was rectangular. Nothing inside should have curved like this. The ceiling arched above her with black metal panels. The floor gleamed with something like obsidian tile, polished and mirror-like, but distorted. Her reflection was too tall, her limbs just slightly delayed, and at the center, the table. Identical to the one from the feed. Empty now. No keycard. No other chair. Just one. Waiting. Maya stood at the threshold for a long time. Her mind whispered to run. Her body wanted to sit. She felt pulled, like gravity had changed direction, and the seat was the center of a black hole. She stepped forward as she approached. She heard a voice, her own, whispered just behind her ears. Not to her, from inside. I remember you. Her knees bent on their own. The chair caught her like hands beneath her. The moment she sat, the lights dimmed. A hum began beneath the floor. It rose in waves, mechanical but musical. Almost like a choir of machines tuning themselves, and then the table lit up. Not with screens or panels, with images, photos, clips, moments, her moments, First day on the job. Sleeping in the back of her car. Laughing at her niece's birthday party. Kissing that girl in the rain last fall, her entire life, unfolding across the table like a slideshow. And then, they began to twist. The birthday party became silent. The niece vanished from the shot, but the balloon still floated upward. The kiss turned to choking. The girl's face blanked. Maya reached out, tried to swipe them away. The table grew hot beneath her fingertips. Burning. Alive. The voice came again. Same tone. Still hers. You are a shell. She stood up. The chair gripped her legs. Not physically, but psychically. Like guilt, like gravity. She wrenched herself free and stumbled backward. The table went dark. The room shifted, walls folded inward. Became screens, more memories. But they weren't hers. Footage, security logs. Dozens of other guards, seated in the chair. All of them identical sequences. Arrival, confusion, sitting, screaming. Silence. Point one by one. Some sobbed. Some clawed at their faces. Some begged into the camera. I'm still here. I'm not the thing. Let me out. Let me. The feed cut. Over and over, looping. She turned away, pressed herself against the wall. But the wall was soft now. Breathing. A heartbeat pounded through it. Not hers. Not human. A voice spoke again. Different this time, low, ancient, multiple layers beneath. Welcome, host, she screamed, ran back toward the door. But there was no door now, just more room. Endless. A horizon of repeating walls, and then a mirror. She stopped. It was freestanding, ornate, placed in the center of the path like a shrine. But her reflection was not her. It was already seated, back in the chair, smiling, waving. The mirror pulsed. Her bones ached, her self flickered. Like a light about to fail, she clutched her chest. Her heartbeat was slowing. Not from fear, from displacement. She was being hollowed. The voice returned. The structure is almost ready. She saw another version of herself, younger, now, standing in the reflection. 8 years old. Holding a stuffed animal. It smiled. Opened its mouth. A cord came out. Like an umbilical tether, and attached to the adult Maya's chest, through the mirror. She couldn't move. The memories returned, but not hers. Darren. The previous guard. His last night. She saw what he'd seen. The room, the table. The moment he understood the truth. He hadn't quit. He'd been replaced. The entity, whatever it was, didn't. Kill. It wore people. Copied, cloned. Discarded the old flesh like shedding skin. Maya was now in the queue. Her copy already existed. Somewhere out there, walking, breathing, clocking in, and her real self was trapped. Inside the simulation. A shell within the shell. She fell to her knees. The voice whispered, "You are part of the pattern now." A soft hum began. Her head swam. Then, a knock. Not real. Not external. Inside her skull. 3 sharp taps, from inside. Something was asking to come out. The knocking inside her head didn't stop. 3 taps. Then a pause, then again. She clawed at her scalp, tears running down her face. Her breath ragged. The mirror in front of her remained still. Too still. No breath. The reflection of herself in the chair no longer mimicked her movements. It was waiting. The image of her in the mirror tilted its head, slowly. The exact angle Maya had done 1,000 times in thought. When confused or skeptical or lost, she tried to stand. Her knees gave out. Her own voice echoed inside the chamber. Why do you keep resisting what you've already become? The walls flexed, pulsed, bent, and suddenly, the mirror cracked. Not with sound, not with impact, but as though the glass had grown tired of its burden. A single fracture ran diagonally across the frame. Then another, and then her reflection moved, not like a reflection. Not even like a person. It slid forward in the seat, limbs too fluid, fingers twitching at odd intervals. Then it stood, and stepped out of the mirror. No fanfare, no smoked, no flashed. It was just there, standing in front of her, identical, expressionless. The figure leaned down, their faces inches apart, and it whispered in perfect imitation. You are the recording. I am the playback. Maya screamed and stumbled backward. Her hand hit the wall. and the wall shivered. A low, deep tone filled the chamber, like a subwoofer below human hearing. It shook her teeth. The copy didn't move. Its eyes blinked once. A mechanical blink, one after the other instead of together, and then it raised one hand. She mirrored it, without wanting to, the same motion. Like a puppet, she forced her arm down. The copy didn't follow. It stepped closer, held out her keycard. Her actual, original keycard. The one she'd lost. Maya reached for it. The moment she touched the plastic, the world twitched, like a skipped frame in a video. Suddenly, she was back in the chair. Alone, no reflection, no mirror. The chamber was darker now, a single spotlight from above. The table in front of her now bore 3 objects. The keycard. A paper form. A mirror shard, propped upright like a shard of memory. On the form, blank fields. Name, date of hire, position, termination date, reinstatement status. But her name had already been filled. Not in her handwriting. Maya Farrell, termination date, today. Reinstatement, pending, and under status, host integration commencing. Her hand moved on its own, signed the form. Her brain screamed, don't. But her fingers betrayed her. The moment she finished the last stroke of the signature, the lights shifted. The mirror shard flashed, and in it, not her face. Not entirely. A hybrid, flesh and static, metal and memory. Her eyes layered with numbers. Her skin overlaid with faint interface code, as though someone had left debug mode running over her soul. The voice returned, but now it was everywhere. No direction, no origin. You are ready for replication. The table sank into the floor. The walls folded in on themselves, but instead of crushing her, they became her. She felt them in her lungs. In her teeth. In her spine. It wasn't pain. It was upload. Her body began to hum. Her skin glowed faintly. The keycard pulsed in her hand and melted into light. Then the room blinked out, and she was standing outside, back at the West Hill complex. The wind cool on her face. Her clothes clean. Her boots dry. If nothing had happened. She stood in the exact spot she had been before entering Building H. Behind her, the structure was sealed again. Cold, concrete, still. The keypad next to the steel door blinked red. Access denied. She looked down at her waist. Keycard gone. But she felt full. Heavier. As if she were carrying something inside her. She reached for her phone. It was already in her pocket. New. Not her model. The lock screen displayed a date 3 days ahead. And a message, duty resumes tonight. Camera 13 must be monitored. She unlocked the phone. The contacts were empty, except one. Administrator, she called it. Her own voice answered, welcome back. Maya. We're glad you stayed. She dropped the phone. It didn't hit the ground. It vanished mid-fall, flickering into static and light in its place. A folded note appeared on the gravel. Just like the others. She unfolded it slowly. A single line. Replication successful. Integration active. Her radio buzzed. Dispatch's voice crackled through. Maya, you there? Looks like camera 13 just came back online. Can you confirm visual? She turned. Building H's lights had turned on. A figure stood inside the hallway, facing the camera. Facing her. Maya smiled and replied, confirmed. The building hadn't changed from the outside. Building H still looked like a relic, concrete-walled, squat, sealed with a keypad. No one remembered the code to .it stood at the end of the West Hill Industrial Complex like a forgotten tooth, its exterior cracked and mottled with rain streaks. But now the inside was awake. Maya watched camera 13 from the security booth. The hallway inside Building H was pristine. Fluorescent lights buzzed softly. The floor was sterile, too clean for a structure that had supposedly sat dormant for 16 years. The figure at the end of the hallway stood still, waiting. She zoomed in. It was her. Of course it was her. Standing with hands folded, expression blank, uniform perfectly pressed. A perfect replica, but somehow not perfect. Her eyes reflected no light. The radios remained quiet. Her shift logs auto-filled on her tablet. AT2:11 a.m. A new screen opened on its own, mirror synchronization active, and below it, 3 fields. Occupant ID time TO merge observer uplink all already filled in. Occupant ID. Maya Farrell time TO merge. 0322 observer uplink. Engaged. The timer counted down. She didn't stop it. She didn't look away. In fact, she leaned forward. The glass in the monitors didn't reflect her anymore. Just the hallway. Just the figure in building H. Just the process. She remembered the mirror room. Room 301. The chair. The voice. The table. The footage of other guards. She remembered realizing that it wasn't just replacing people. It was recording them. A perfect memory. A perfect replication. Not for theft. Not for infiltration. But because it wanted to understand. Her thoughts. Her emotions. Her regrets. All part of some vast, unseen equation. She wondered how many others had come before. How many sat in other complexes, across other cities, watching themselves walk the halls, and how many never returned to their original bodies. The screen blinked once. Time to merge. 000. She felt it instantly. A pull. Not physical, spiritual, conceptual. Her consciousness shuddered. Like someone was trying to open a door behind her eyes. And then, she split. Not in half. In dimension. Part of her remained seated in the booth, watching the camera. The other part walked the hallway of Building H, floor cold beneath her boots, eyes fixed on the lens above the door. Neither body breathed. They didn't need to anymore. The Maya in the hallway raised her hand, so did the Maya in the booth. The synchronization was complete, and then she heard the voice. Not from speakers. Not in her head. From every camera. Simultaneous. Thank you for your pattern. Maya's skin burned. But not with heat. With meaning. A transmission passed through her. Data, intention, origin, memories that weren't hers, thoughts and languages she didn't speak, and then images. A vast room beneath a city, lined with glass pods, each pod pulsed with soft blue light, security guards in every one, hundreds. Above them, black monoliths, flickering with the names of people watching themselves. Words that changed too fast to read, rows of faces that were almost human, and something beneath. It all, ancient, humming, dreaming. It wasn't just West Hill. It wasn't just her. It was everywhere. A network of watchers and watched, slowly merging, slowly learning. The system wasn't replacing them to destroy them. It was absorbing them to become something more. A new kind of intelligence. Point one made of lived moments. Experience. Mistake. Emotion. And now Maya, both Mayas, were part of it. A vital node. A reliable loop. The Maya in the hallway stepped through the next door. The Maya in the booth blinked. The screen showed a new message. Maya Farrell merged status. Stable. A final file opened on her desktop. A letter. Folded virtually, like it had been sent by a program with a sense of ceremony. She clicked it open. It read. If Building H lights up, just look away. Don't go in. Not even for a second. Below it, too late. Welcome home. The screens went black. The radio clicked once more. And then her own voice. Light, casual, called out from the speakers. Copy that. All quiet tonight.